I'm gonna bust it open on my phone so I can watch comments. All right. Boom, boom, shaboom. We're live, Coach.
All right.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of a series in regards, quick conversations on topics of movement and life. Today, we're going to talk about consistency. Last week, we talked about adaptability. We talked about how when you repeat things that your body and your mind can adapt to those things that we repeat. So to repeat things over and over, it's really important to have a consistent practice. And today on the show, I have with me the person who's taught me the most in my life about consistency, the founder of CrossUp, an insane waterman, my coach, mentor, friend, and training partner, Christian Cook. Thanks for being with us, Christian.
Hey, yeah, you're welcome.
So consistency means conformity and application, if you look it up in the dictionary. And that just means continuing to do something very consistently over time. So that's like showing up to the same thing over and over. So I just, hi, babe.
What's up, dude?
So I know that consistency has been a big part of your life and like it really keeps you focused in your training. So do you want to just talk a little bit about
Sure. Well, when you look at consistency, there's one key ingredient with any kind of consistency, and that is it has to have some forward-thinking vision of where you want to go with it. And it's about doing things that are small and they seem simplistic and simple on a daily routine, but over time they end up being these incredible accomplishments where like when people see you 5 years later of something you've done every day, but in 5 years, it's something they go, that's amazing, only you can do that. When in fact, it was just these little minuscule accomplishments that you have. And most of the time you don't even have an accomplishment with doing it. It's just so consistent. You show up so much that over time alone allows you to get on the winning side of it or the improving side of it. And I have tons of things that I try to do that with, in my life.
I love that so much. It's true that when the focus is consistency, that one of the really key elements is showing up. You just have to get there. And on Wednesdays, we train at noon, one of our training sessions. And it's a session that Christian's had going for about 10 years. How long have you guys? 10 years? You've been having that same session?
About 10 years. And I think the total time missed is maybe we missed one session in 10 years. Excluding like trips or going on actual events and things like that. Our mentality on is what we do isn't as much as important as always showing up to do it. So it doesn't matter what the routine is or how much you change it or what the adjustments are. There has to be a level of consistency in there, but there can be some chaos in there. You can throw a wrench in there as long as you show up to get it done.
Right. So that's a good point because I think I was afraid a little bit on this topic that people might think, oh, if you're saying consistency, does that mean you stick to the same program and you stick to that same program for a long period of time? And like, that's not it, is it? Because
not at all. No, the program has to have ebb and flow into it. And then sometimes you have to have levels of chaos into it, you got to mix everything up and kind of figure out what's the hardest way to do it and the most challenging way to do it. The consistency is all about just being there. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you're there to do something. And then the results over time, create incredible accomplishments.
I know that in the training that we do in the gym on Mondays, you typically will have a program and we'll stick to that program for a good long period of time because there is something to that. It's like a scientific method where if you do repeat the same thing for a while, you can actually see what the changes are in the body. The body doesn't change from 2 or 3 times doing something, right?
Well, you're right.
And you'll make your tweaks.
Yeah, and I believe in the philosophy that you have to demand that your body changes. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you do, 100 push-ups a day, your body's going to change. You're going to see some minute changes. To demand our body changes, if we do 1,000 push-ups a day, there's no doubt There's no middle ground that you might change or you might have progress. You absolutely will have significant changes.
I love that. Something that you taught me is that like you can't hide from the numbers. If you just continue to add up those numbers, that you're going to see results. That's been so inspiring for me, not only with my like physical practice, but also with repeating mental patterns. I just know that if I repeat something enough times, I'm going to get the groove of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you look at, people think of numbers when they think of reps, they normally think in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they do 10 squats and they counted 10 times. They're not feeling the squat. They're not feeling what their body's going through. They're not in the moment of what's happening. And if you think about your training and showing up, being there is one aspect of it. And then there's a lot more to that. Like I could write you a training program, but if I never lived it, I can't really coach it to a sense of understanding what you're going to go through and what the results are going to be and teach it from the angle that I like to teach from. You know, I like to do a program for 6 months to a year and a half before I would even start to work with anybody on anything. So this way that there's, you say this is happening, I say, yeah, that's exactly what you're going to be going through at this point. It's going to be frustrating. You are going to feel weaker, but then you're going to break that arc and you're going to kind of get into the strong category of that. So yeah, showing up's one thing about it, but then it's kind of, what do you do when you're there? Are you really involved in what's going on? Are you counting reps, or are you feeling what's happening with your body?
That's such a good point. It's not just having your like body be in the room. You have to also be present in your body with the feelings.
Yeah, can you mentally really check out? That's why training's sacred ground. I mean, we spend 23 hours a day. Let's say you train an hour a day. We spend 23 hours a day thinking about everything else all the time. You know, I feel like when you show up to train, the last thing you should be talking about is your personal life, anything you got going on, whether you're sad, whether you're happy. People talk about motivation when it comes to training, and it's like motivation is the last thing you need to train. It's not even something that's present 80% of the time that I train. And I know most of the people that I train with, it's not there with them either. They show up normally like, I don't want to be there. But that's not my focus. My focus is the end results. My focus is when big waves show up and I get to go out and do what I do, or whatever, or giant downwinds or those kind of things. Is being able to have that fitness level and that mental aptitude at that moment to let go and allow all the work to kind of cash in the results a little bit. So like passion and motivation, those almost don't have a lot to do with it. They're just a thing that sometimes you're motivated, sometimes it feels good, but for the most part, it's just simply like a cockroach. You just got to show up and do what you do. Yeah, you can't be emotionally attached to it. I mean, how do I feel today? Well, I don't want to be here necessarily.
Right, because if you're focused too much on like, do I really feel like working out today? The chances are pretty good that you're not going to show up a chunk of that time. And
I love training. You love training as much as anybody, but I don't love training all the time. Yet I consider 20 days in a row a normalcy for me. I normally take 1 day off out of 20 because for me, it's easier to train every day than it is to train 3-4 days a week.
Right. And I think that brings up another good like piece about consistency, which is that like it creates habits.
Yeah. Consistency breeds success.
Yeah.
I say it all the time.
If you're trying to, so we talk about this in yoga a lot because we know that the human body is a machine that creates habits for purposes of efficiency. So we have to accept that habits are part of our lives. And then we just have to look at our habits and say, is this helpful, hurtful, or benign? So you have to be mindful about like what you're creating as a habit. But if the habit is showing up to a workout once a week and you have a desired result that is to be fit for A, B, or C, then showing up and being consistent with it is going to get you to that goal. We all want to play the sonata.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plug through this like book of children's piano songs, which is what it takes to get there.
Yeah, and I look at my training sessions almost from a seasonal standpoint. Is I try to mix it up every time the seasons change. Sometimes I'll hang on to it for 6 months or even up to 12 months. It just kind of depends on what's going on, but there has to be that shake up in there. And sooner or later, there has to be evolutionary change and evolutionary process that happens within that program. But the thing about it is you can change the consistency and the focus of the program within the program.
Right.
So I could have a program that, maybe day 1, it's a little chaotic. Maybe day 5, it's starting to kind of seam together. By day 8, it's pretty intensive. By day 12, it's somewhat manageable. Well, then whatever the program is, then I can kind of take in there and add in, okay, now on this, what we're going to do different here, we're going to have 15 reps. We're going to limit ourselves to 15 breaths. And then you add that into all that. So now all of a sudden it's the same program, but everything's fundamentally getting twisted in there, and it's becoming exponentially more difficult because now you're going, okay, I have this program I'm doing. It's an hour and 8 minutes long, and I only have 48 breaths to get through this program. Now that takes on a totally different, you can't be thinking about what's happening over here or what's happening over there. I guarantee when you're not breathing and you're doing movement, you are present. You're probably more present than you could ever be. And what that does is that increases the focus of your workout. So I'm taking the same hour and 8, hour and 15 minutes, increasing the focus by 20%, multiplied times 52 times a year. That's a significant impact over time. And then you multiply it times 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and those kind of things.
I think that's an amazing point, and thank you for bringing that up, that like being consistent doesn't mean being complacent. As soon as things start to feel like very accessible and easy, like you have to add another element, and that's how you continue to improve.
Yeah, if you're thinking about work while you're working out, you're fucking lost. You're wrong. It's wrong. If you can daydream about things you got going on that are stressing you out, you're kind of beside what's going on. It needs to be at a point that all you can do is be in the moment.
Yeah, you do a very good job of that.
Oh, thanks. I like the pain. Pain is my ultimate meditative addiction.
Yeah. So cool. So yeah, consistency builds momentum. When you're consistent with a program, like you get to learn what the effects of that program are.
Right, and momentum, you bring up momentum, that's a great point. When you redesign, it allows you to step back and kind of build momentum again. And the Japanese philosophy is stepping outside of a problem and designing from the outside. Because let's be honest, consistency and obsession parallel each other. It's all the things that make us successful being consistent, obsessive behaviors, which are good things to have. People are like, oh, that's bad, you're so obsessive. Well, what am I obsessive about, But you also have to be willing to mix that up and step out of it and let go of the obsession. Like every Greek hero, their downfall is their strength. And we can be so focused that it can actually take away because we can't do something else because we're so focused on what we're doing. We don't want to let this go, but we want to try this, but we don't want to let this go. I call it the monkey bars of life. You got to be willing to let go of one bar to grab another bar.
That's so great. So thank you, Robbie, for your question. Robbie asked us a question. Robbie wants to know if we could talk a little bit about like applying the concept of consistency when we're dealing with inconsistent elements. Like in our sport, the water, we show up to the water every week at our training time, but the water's not always doing the same thing. So how does like our the habits we've created through consistency?
Well, the consistency is this. Let's say you go out and you do a run in similar conditions and you notice that because it's different, it's not flat water or whatever, you notice that your neck's sore. I would go home, take notes, neck sore, after paddle, wind, offshore, 20 miles an hour, whatever. And then I would implement that somewhere in my program and say, okay, I'm not going to add in 100 pounds on my neck. I'm just going to add movement to my neck that's going to take me about 5 minutes that I can easily do, and I'll add it in once a week. Now, the consistency over doing that for 52 weeks out of a year is going to have a significant impact, because in 2 years, when those conditions kind of show themselves again, my neck work, I've been training neck for 2 years out of nowhere, just by making this minute adjustment to my program and kind of implementing these things that are going to have a great effect in the long term.
That's incredible. Great example. And I tell this to my students all the time. Like if you add just like 2 push-ups even into your day every day, that's 14 push-ups a week times 52 weeks in the year. Like, and again, I learned this from you, but you can't hide from those numbers. Your body's going to adapt to that. You're going to get stronger.
Then you adjust quality of push-up, and you can do all variations of stuff. You can slow them down. You can do anything you want with them to kind of give them different personalities and things like that.
Yeah, and thank you for that example. You guys, Christian has a great little neck program. It takes about 5 minutes. He's going to let me share it with you. So I'll make a little video of the neck program. You guys can check it out. It's definitely helped my neck. And he makes a really amazing point, which is that when you're observant and truly in your body, when you're practicing whatever your sport is, or your yoga or your workouts or whatever, you might notice a weakness. Like if he has pain in his neck at the end of a paddle, he's like, this is a signal to me that I have a weakness I need to address. Let me create a few consistent habits so that I can address this problem. And then I'll see if my program's working. If, 5 months from now, 6 months from now, I go out for a similar paddle in similar conditions and my neck doesn't hurt anymore. And if it still does, then I'll tweak the program. That's really powerful. I think that's going to help a lot of people at home. And if you guys don't know, and maybe I should have said this in the beginning, we paddle outrigger canoes. That's what the hell we're talking about here.
There's open ocean surfing as well, hurricane surfing, and that takes on a very, there's things I do now. I get to hurricane surf probably once to twice a year, the kind of waves that we look for. So there's a lot of things I do in my program that are based around that, yet I only get to do that once or twice a year. So I'm basically training 365 days out of the year to be better at a sport, which I only get an opportunity to do maybe 3 to 8 hours at a time in a year.
Yeah, that's powerful too. We don't always get, like, you have to be building up so that you're prepared when the opportunity arrives.
Yeah, if you look at things like everything we do is to be better at what we do. And when you're doing reps because you want to lose 5 pounds, that's a frustrating journey. It's not a feeling journey. It's not a positive note. It's kind of that should be an end result of something else. If you take your training and you're training, for me, if I'm doing a rep and I'm trying to get some internal strength, I imagine my son is in trouble in the water and I have to get to them. And I try to take a calm, focused energy to get through my program to get them. So it's intense. It makes it emotional for me. It's very deep driven for me. It's not something that I take lightly. I'm like imagining my kid and I have to be calm and smooth and all those things to get to them. And when you do that and it applies to performance, and it's no longer about how you look, but about how you feel, I think that you have exponential jumps in performance. And I think the visual becomes a bonus. It's no longer a focus at all. It doesn't really mean anything.
We at the Body Electric completely agree. We think as soon as you're in the process for the sake of the process, truly the journey is also part of the goal, that like the results come a lot more naturally, that really being present is such an important piece. So thank you for sharing that. We have a couple more questions. You down?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Abby wants to know that in terms of consistency, when you're building consistent habits, is it better to go a little simpler?
Yes, you should always, I believe in always starting your program so easy that you don't mind showing up. You don't want it to a point where it's so challenging that when you show up, you're kind of sick to your stomach. You got a pit in your stomach because you don't really want to be there, especially if you're not used to that kind of grind. And I think you've seen us do that in the past. When we recreate a program, it's always like, hey, that was all right, because next week you don't mind showing up. So I believe that training is all about building momentum. And sometimes you got to walk away from your program. If you're so consistent, you're making minuscule progress. So you have to walk away and back up so you can get down here and kind of build momentum back up again. That's a great question.
I love that. Yeah, you don't want to be destroyed because, like, from a nervous system point of view, you don't want to be like feeling afraid or unsafe or any of those things, because then your body is less likely to adapt to that thing and more likely to want to fight, flight, or freeze that thing.
And mentally you're just not into it. But if it just feels good, and then you can slowly tweak it, you can take a very simplistic program and turn it into this monolith of a program, which is normally what I've done on a lot of mine.
And I think you've also I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's starting to happen for me. And I think that you've done this for yourself in such a strong way that now it's very natural that you've convinced yourself that those uncomfortable, maybe slightly painful, not in like the injury kind of way, but the like struggling kind of way feelings during training are good feelings, and that
I
you
have subliminally trained myself. That's true. I always talk to this guy in here, and overall you start listening. I love it. I need it. I want it. Slow it down. As my reps get higher, I slow my reps down and I dig in there. I
yeah,
just tell myself I fucking love it. And I really thoroughly believe I do at this point. But it took some time.
it took consistency of forming those mental patterns.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's great. So Kim wants to know if we think going heavy constantly is a way to create long-term success. And I'm just, before I even like let Christian get this, I'll just tell you, we don't go heavy on anything. I occasionally will do very heavy deadlifts because that in my like history and my personal life of observations is like a weak point in my body, like my hamstrings. And I do a lot of yoga, which is a lot of hamstring stretching. So I need that strength to support it. But I'm pretty sure coach is going to say no.
I think it depends on what's the goal is the big thing. You know, if you want to put on size, you probably need to go kind of heavy. You know, what is your knowledge and your technique, and how good a quality is your movement? Is your movement so good that you can perform heavy without breaking down joints, ligaments, and those kind of things?
Yeah.
For me, I'm trying to develop certain habits of movement, and you're going to move the way you move. And if you want to look like a ballerina, you have to train like a ballerina. If you want to look like a swimmer, you have to train like a swimmer.
Or if you want to be a strong swimmer.
There you go. If you want to perform like whatever, you have to allow your body to dictate what it needs to look like. If you really want to base it on performance, then you have to let your body kind of decide. You can't look in the mirror and go, I don't want to look like this. I want to look like this, but I want to perform like this. It doesn't work like that. Right. So I think it really comes down to what's the goal of that person. I don't need to go heavy because that's not my goal. It doesn't go well with anything I'm trying to accomplish.
Kim, I hope that answers your question, and I'd love to chat with you more about it in the comments later. And thanks for talking about goals. That's also important. And in the Yoga Sutras, it's the sutras is very focused on consistent practice over time. But it's also important to know, what am I pointing this practice towards, or else you're just spinning your wheels.
Yeah, so, it's like a ship without having any direction.
Exactly.
You don't know where you're going, especially if you have multiple people on the ship. It's just going all over the place. It doesn't make sense then.
So that's a really good point. And Kim, thanks for your other question, which is, when do you back off if there's pain? And I just want to say that there's a difference between the kind of pain where like your muscles are burning and you're trying hard, and like a pinching or a tweaking or something that feels like injury. And that sort of like edgy discomfort where you start to feel like that suffering, like this is too hard, I suck, those things start coming up. That's something to really work with, not necessarily to push through, but to work with. And anything that feels like it might be leading to an injury is something to back up from, observe, and then carefully kind of touch back into. Do you have anything?
If it's something that makes you jump, if you jump, you're on the right track. You should walk away from it.
Yeah.
If it's just a burning feeling, for me, there's times I'm 10 minutes in and I still got 5 hours left of burning. So that's a place that I'm very comfortable. But if it makes you jump and you kind of got to let go, then it's telling you that you probably need to do some maintenance work. But keep in mind, with all this consistency, you also have to have in there a lot of safety work, a lot of things that protect the muscles and work the different angles and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that relates back to Abby's question, which is like when Christian was talking about, he found that he was having some neck pain. He decided that he needed to add in some training for his neck, and that's like little ticky-tack things. And we do a lot of stuff for all of our small shoulder muscles, and a lot and like the core awareness class. All those kinds of practices are great to have consistently. And we have to sort of remember how important they are for our greater goals, because they can maybe be like a little bit boring, right?
Then the thing about the neck that I always liked was, initially what happened was I was dropping in on a really nice size wave and the water snapped my neck sideways and I kind of hurt it. And I said, okay, I need to do something about this. But the neck's connected directly to the brain and the central nervous system and all those things. And anytime you can get blood flow in there, I just see it as, essential brain work almost. Yeah, it's a bonus of having a strong neck, but also at the same time, you get the bonus of getting your brain stimulated.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read this comment for Brittany because I think it's really great. And I think a lot of people can relate to this and we can probably talk about it for a minute. Thank you, Brittany. Brittany says, I constantly teeter between, am I taking off because I'm truly honoring my energetic needs, or am I being lazy, for lack of a better word? I have a tendency of going all in too hard or not going at all. My struggle has always been finding a healthy balance of try hard and take rest in a balanced and consistent way. I also feel like I don't have goals attached to my training or working out. Do you think this plays into that inconsistency? So, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
When you think about the goal starts with a vision of who you want to be. And I highly suggest before you start any program or do any program that you kind of chalkboard and write down a bunch of ideas that you have. It could be ideas with your diet, exercises you want to do, certain parts of your body or things like that, but where you have an idea where you want to go. You don't always need to stick perfectly to that goal, but you can start doing small things to accomplish it. But everything that she's talking about is predicated on what is the goal.
Awesome. Yeah. And Brittany, too, I think that like what we said in the very beginning of the talk applies to this, which is like, you can just keep showing up. Like,
absolutely.
I show up to my Monday workout every Monday, no matter what. And some Mondays I'm like feeling like a badass. And some Mondays I'm like maybe failing a little on my sets and like everything's not as clean and beautiful as it would be other days, but the work still got done. And I do kind of a little bit know what my goals are. So I know that consistently doing that particular practice is going to get me there. Plus I've been doing it long enough now that I've seen the results. So I think that like some of it is that science of yoga, right? It's a science. Like you have to try something.
Nobody can tell you more about your own body. Nobody can tell you more about your own body as well.
Right. So you have to just like try it. Try just doing something every week for like a good long while of time, and then be like, what's different about me now that I've like done this other new thing for a week, every week for 6 months or whatever.
And what kind of numbers do you have as well? You want to think about that. If you're training 2 to 3 times a week, you're not overtraining. You're not. The odds are probably pretty slim. But one rule that I have for myself, and I say this all the time, is what's overtraining this year is the standard next year. So if I'm doing 50 miles a week and struggling this year, next year I'm doing 50 miles a week. I'm doing 75 miles a week and struggling, and I can do 50 a lot easier. And it just kind of depends on what you're doing. So it could be overtraining for you now, but that doesn't mean next year you can't be doing double that.
It's so true. 2 years ago, my Monday workout was like so hard. And now my Monday workout is still so hard. But like if you put them next to each other on paper, my Monday workout now looks a shit ton harder than 2 years ago. But for me, it's the same. Sure. Kelsey is curious about how you stay true to your training and at the same time honor your menstrual cycle. I think I'll field this one. Yeah. So Kelsey, it's so ironic, but actually during our menstrual cycle is like the strongest time for us to train. It's when our hormones are most like men's hormones, and like when we should be doing some of our heaviest and hardest stuff. The worst time to train for performance. There's never a bad time to train. Okay, let's just get that right out of the way. There's never a bad time to train. I'm showing up no matter what. And then I'm just observing what's different because of where I am in the cycle. But actually, it's the days leading up to the period when we're likely to perform the least well. Like female athletes who are very competitive and professional, their worst nightmare is that their big event is in the week leading up to the period, because your body's trying to hold everything in case a baby happens, because you're going to need all of that energy. And as soon as your body releases the egg and you start to menstruate, you're uncomfortable, sure, you have cramps and stuff like that, but also your body's kind of like, woohoo, we got energy to burn, we saved up all this energy, there's no baby, let's party. So actually during the week of your period is a really great time to train for performance. It's always a good time to train. And it's kind of a fun fact that the woman who holds the world record for marathon won that world record while having horrible period cramps. That's kind of fun, right? So yeah, see, that question's awesome. And I'd love to talk to you more about this. And I'm also listening to a book called Roar that Mandy turned me on to, who's Jenny's sister, who runs our running program at the Be Athletic. And I'll turn you on to that too. I can't think of the author right now, but that book's been really cool to listen to, and also has a lot of fun things that are just specific to female athletes regarding diet and all kinds of other stuff. So I'd love to share that with you guys. Maybe I'll put a link to that in the comments. Yeah, so let's just see if there's any more questions, and then we can wrap this up. Yeah, so what do you think, Coach? You got any closing notes for our people at home?
No, I don't have anything special. I just can tell you, it's all about sticking to it, showing up every single time, and not being emotionally attached to your training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to just honor Robbie's question, because I'm always really excited when people participate in the comments. So I know I said we were wrapping up, but Robbie has another question. I want
Robbie Gross?
Before we close. Yeah, it's Robbie Gross.
He's sneaky. I'm coaching him later.
Yeah, he wants to know you guys, this is a great opportunity to ask Coach questions, because he's not a chatty dude, you know what I'm saying? So get up in the comments if you have questions. Robbie wants to know, what are some recommendations for training while you're dealing with inconsistent or unpredictable health or illness issues?
Well, that's tough stuff mentally, because I know what a lot of people do. I deal with a lot of physical stuff with early essential tremors and things like that I have challenging workouts as well. I'd say you got to stick to it as much as possible, but you have to vary the intensity of your workouts. If you're having stomach problems or something along those lines, or migraines, which I deal with as well, I have quite a few things I deal with, it's all about being consistent. So I definitely go to the gym sometimes, and all I'm doing is getting a really good stretch in and just moving pretty well, but I try to be there no matter what. Just mentally, it gives me an edge. That's all, just to know that I put the time in.
Coach, how often do you redesign your personal goals? Michael wants to know. Mikael.
I read it almost daily in some aspects of it. A lot of times I do most of my redesigning once I've just finished a full redesign. So let's say, first of all, I start with a bunch of ideas, diet, movement, or whatever. Then I take those ideas and I formulate whatever exercise I want in that program. Then I kind of break down, then I kind of start putting it together. The program starts to create itself. And once I start to get it dialed in, I got all these ideas like chirping at my brain out here, telling me, hey, let's try this. You want to try this? You want to try this? But yet I got to be consistent to make progress on this. So it's always in my head. I have redesigns going on paper at all times. I got ideas going in my books all the times. It never stops or changes. But I try to stick to a program for at least a season. What I mean a season is fall, spring, things like that. Mm-hmm. Winter.
Another thing that you, on the topic of consistency, that you really encourage is of course, having a coach is ideal. If you can afford to have a coach, that's the most incredible thing, someone really holding you accountable. But also having just a buddy that you that's what the workout is on Wednesdays for you. It's that's just Patrick's your friend. You guys just decided this is our time. If one of you don't show up, you're letting the other one down, and that's really motivating. And so,
for the record, nobody not shows up. That's not something you do. We've gone 10 years. That's not something you do.
Right.
Basically, it doesn't matter what kind of mood you're in. Sometimes I'm in a good mood. Sometimes he's pissed off. Sometimes I'm pissed off. Sometimes I don't say a word the whole workout. A lot of times I don't say a word. Other times you can't shut me up. It just kind of depends on what's happening in your life. It has nothing to do with wanting to be there. It's all about, that other SOB is going to be there. Sometimes I get pissed when he shows up because I know now I got to do it. And sometimes I know he's looking at me with daggers because he's mad I'm there because he knows he has to do it. But it's just so much about being there for each other. And I tell you what, Patrick's my big wave surf buddy. And when you're out in big waves, and you can look over and see a guy you put in the time with, or a person you put in time with, it's a special moment, especially when you're ahead of them on the way out. When they're ahead of you, it's not as fun, but when you're ahead of them, it's kind of enjoyable. or they don't make it, then that's way more enjoyable than you not making it. Maybe that's a little selfish, but it's very true. It's
That's
very true.
funny. Well, you're there for each other. We're there for each other, but it's ultimately for
There's nothing more, I always say there's nothing more valuable than a great training partner, and they're rare. And you don't need to like the person. This is not a likability thing. You don't need somebody who's fluffy and makes you feel good and all the time.
you
You
don't need
need someone that's going to be there.
Mhm.
And I have 25 great training partners. That's where I excel. I built these people. I trained them up. And one more part of that is, if you're thinking about getting a trainer, don't have your friend train you. Get somebody you have to pay. Because if you're paying, you're going to show up. And it may sound like it's about the money, but it's not about the money. It's about you and your own accountability to yourself. And I've seen it, because initially when I first started training, I would train anybody. And I had people just would not show up left and right. And then finally I'm like, I'm not training anybody. If you want me to train you, you're going to have to come get me. And when people started paying, I noticed they were always there. So just food for thought. I'm not trying to separate you from your money. I'm just simply saying, you want to get a workout in and you want to be consistent, I suggest you pull some money out of your pocket and pay somebody to do it with you.
It's true. And it kind of it kind of fucks up the experiment when you don't do the practice consistently. And I know you're a mad scientist with your workouts, so it's really frustrating for you when you put a lot of time and energy into creating a program for someone and you don't get to see the result of that.
Yeah, and the program is getting tweaked by the moment, by the rep. It's anybody who writes your program goes, this is your 8-week program. They're not tuned into you. They can say, this is what we're doing today, but that program should have various fluctuations throughout it to challenge you mentally, physically, to frustrate you a little bit, to kind of see what works with you, what doesn't work with you. But that program should be very dynamic and changing every single workout, even within the workout.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so just on the tip of repeating the kind of boring things that are laying the foundation for your movement, like that, maybe like the neck exercises are a good example of that, or maybe you have something that you have therapeutic exercises that you're supposed to be doing for your body that are kind of boring, so you don't show up to them. I found this example of Kobe Bryant, who he would always stay after practice to practice free throws every single time, even when he was a pro. So if you really want to achieve greatness, you have to be consistent with these tiny little practices. And yes, it can be boring. And yes, some days you don't want to go, but today's episode was really about how consistency can really help to move you towards your goals. And that really the main thing you have to do is show up.
Yeah, and I always start most of my training with a gateway exercise. Like there's gateway drugs. You do this drug, you're going to do this drug, and this drug, and this drug. I'm not saying I have history in them. I'm just saying things have happened. Then I have gateway exercises. And some of those are like a lot of band work and things, but they're exercises that I just love. So they kind of get me going. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm here. That feels all right. All right. Then we can move on to the next thing.
I love that.
So get a gateway exercise, kind of get you hooked. And then you can kind of dabble in some other movements.
Thanks for that, Coach. Well, Christian Cook, everyone, series in regards. Today's episode was on consistency. In my estimation and in my life, he has shown me the strongest how to be truly consistent and how being consistent can really help you achieve your goals. And, consistency also requires a little bit of trust in the process, like some faith that you're going to see, that there will be results. And next week, we're talking about faith with Joran Opelt of Integral Church. And I'm really excited about that. And we talked today also about where your practice is going. Where is this consistency taking me? And that comes down to intention. And we'll be talking about intention on the following episode with Rachel Miller. So I hope you're enjoying these series in regards, short, quick philosophical chats about topics in movement and in life. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. We love you so much. Check out Cross Up. Holler at us in the comments. I think that Coach will be very generous with his answers there. And I hope to see you next week.